Hello, looking here at Days of the News. I think it was their debut album, 1997, self-titled. And this this album was, in my memory, everywhere around the summer of that would be the Southern Hemisphere summer of 97, 98. Um, Particularly the single "Touch, Peel, and Stand." The one saying I finally found the reason. I thought that was the title of it actually, but it's called Touch, Peel, and Stand. And I would call these guys uh, post grunge, alternative rock, post grunge, acoustic post grunge, because they are largely acoustic. And I'm saying they. It was basically a one man band. So it was a guy. What's his name? Travis Meeks, and I think he was like 17 when they were signed. I think they were signed in a year or two before this was released. But he was a young man, and they put a band together, and and they record this album. But he maybe what didn't have the best relationship skills, and so the band he kind of was like self from reading about it. And I remember even at the time, I remember on the radio where the DJ was talking about it. He he fired the other members of the band, and they never maybe got to the level that they could have if he was a little bit more balanced. Um, Also, I should also add that this album might have been bigger in New Zealand than it was elsewhere. The reason I say that is because I was reading through the Wikipedia about it, and I was looking at the charts part, and so I got 1997. It got to number 40 on the US Billboard 200, and number 47 on the Australian albums chart, but it got to number one in the New Zealand albums chart. It did go platinum in the US, sold a million copies, but um, I was quite surprised that it went number one in New Zealand, and it was the only country that's it only gives the information for Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And like I said, yeah, that song was played a lot on rock radio, from my memory. They what could I say about the music? It's okay. It really has that post grunge. I think people call it now butt rock um, sound. So we think about what kind of band. So Nickelback, Creed, Three Doors Down. Um, what's some other ones? I'll look here. Who do they name? I guess Nickelback and Creed are the two big. They're kind of the leaders of that group. Nickelback, Live, Bush, Puddle of Mud, Breaking Benjamin, 3 Days Grace. I said Three Doors Down. Is that the same thing? 3 Days Grace, Three Doors is a different band, isn't it? Default. I don't know them. Creed, Collective Soul. I like Collective Soul. Shinedown, Candlebox, Seether, and Matchbox 20. Yeah, Matchbox 20 doesn't fit in with those other groups. All the others, you can hear a line connecting through all their music, but Matchbox 20, no. What? And so all those bands, you can hear the influence of early '90s grunge, alternative rock, particularly Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, with some Nirvana and Soundgarden too. But it's almost like they took the most boring parts of those bands and focused in on on them. And saying that, all those bands, or many of them, did go on and sell millions and millions and millions of copies, and were for a period were some of the biggest bands in the world. There was a couple of months where Creed seemed to be one of the biggest bands in the world, and Nickelback the same. I just sent a message to my work phone. But yeah, these guys, like I said, they go for the acoustic section of that music. And if you take Alice in Chains' Sap EP and Jar of Flies EP, and like I said, you take all of the most interesting parts out of it, and of course the vocal harmonies, and you're left with Days of the New. He really there's one particular song where he does this vocal melody or vocal line that is directly ripping off Alice in Chains. Which one was it? Might have been Solitude. He does this, and there's like vocal affectation that Lane Staley does this. I can't do it, but if you listen to it, you would probably know what I'm talking about. I think the other single was the Downtown. Um, and let's see there. It's produced by Scott Litt, and it was actually he signed them. So Outpost was Scott Litt's imprint through Geffen, if I'm not mistaken. Scott Litt, if you don't know, he is a producer, and what I know most as the producer for REM. He produced a lot of REM's albums, and he also did some of the in the grunge era as well. Where he mixed Heart Shaped Box and All Apologies singles, so he just mixed them. He's also worked with Incubus, Hole, again mixing. See, a lot of the times I don't know in depth about the roles of when we talk about producer, mixing, engineering. And sometimes one person does all three, and sometimes they have three specific roles. Sometimes the engineer is not even mentioned. Um, but he produced 6 REM albums, so I guess that's who we most closely associate with. But yeah, he discovered them maybe, and he signed them, and they're again another kind of what would you call it aspect of that post grunge butt rock era was a lot of the bands were heartland bands. They were from the Midwest and appealed to that section of society as well. Travis Meeks was from Indiana. Um, I don't know any of those other. I don't. Nickelback are Canadian, aren't they? Um, Bush are British. Puddle of Mud. So when I hear Puddle of Mud, that sounds like like Ohio, Indiana type music. Is that unfair? And people do shit on this music a lot, don't they? And it's weird the way that certain music is the way it's tarred with certain brushes, and I can never really shake that off. I talked before about new metal, how new metal seems a lot of music, like for example, hair metal in the 80s. When I was growing up in the 90s, hair metal was seen as an embarrassing joke. Bands like Motley Crue and Poison and to a lesser extent Bon Jovi, they kind of were above it. They kind of managed to float above it because their songs crossed over to the mainstream a lot more and eschewed some of those hair metal tendencies. But yeah, Rat and all those kinds of bands were seen as a joke, an embarrassing joke. But then they had kind of a mid 2000s. They started having kind of a renaissance, and soon some of those bands kind of broke through again, like Motley Crue. Motley Crue had like almost like a second act to their career, or a third act to their career. Actually, would be more like, wouldn't it? Where after the '90s, where Vince Neil left, and they recorded the album with what's his name, John Corabi, and then they made Generation Swine after Vince came back, and it sold like a bucket of shit and sounded like one too. But then they although that song, what's that song? Afraid. I like. Is that? Yeah, Afraid. That's a good song. Um, My point is that they managed to kind of get back to the point where they are now, where Motley Crue are kind of seen as like, they had a and I guess that biopic, The Dirt, the book came out in 2001. They had a pretty big role in making them seem cool again, and then they made the Netflix version. And but other bands like new metal bands haven't had that renaissance, in my opinion. They're still seen as embarrassing and shit. Like Limp Bizkit, for example. Yeah, they still have a fan base because you can see Limp Bizkit can go and they played, I think, Lollapalooza in Chicago last year or the year before last, and they still pull crowds. They go outside of America to Europe and play festival shows and pull massive crowds. I saw Limp Bizkit in 2013 in South Korea. They didn't pull a massive crowd, but they had a sizable, enthusiastic crowd. Um, I've kind of forgot my point now. My point was is that this kind of music, Days of the New, and Days of the New, to be honest, I think they're a bit one note, a bit one dimensional. Like they go for that acoustic sound, but it's almost that's all they've got. But bands like Creed and Nickelback, people shit on them and think they're a joke, and kind of they're the punchline of a lot of musical discussions. But they've got some good songs. Like Creed have got some good songs. They've got a lot of boring songs as well, and a lot of samey songs. But some of their songs are legitimately good. Same with Nickelback. There are a few Nickelback songs that are good, and I'm sure everyone would agree if they were truthful. But for some reason, we kind of stick to this. Yeah, what is it? Like, I guess it's because the music is kind of seen as unauthentic, is in that it was so derivative of something that came before it, without the thing about grunge was that it was tapped into the pain of people like Kurt Cobain or Lane Staley or whoever else, and we can see what happened to a lot of those guys aren't with us anymore. So it seemed like and I guess almost like Kurt Cobain was a martyr for this. It was like it was real. He wasn't just singing about it. When he said, what was that song? You know you're right. With the chorus, he's saying pain. It was that's what he was feeling to the point where he didn't want to live anymore. Whereas these other bands, people just think they're doing it when they're singing. They're singing about things that aren't real, or I don't know. I don't actually know what I'm saying here, but the album's not terrible. It's not great either. It's kind of like a B minus, C plus album with some okay stuff, but some a bit samey as the time goes by. Um, as I was saying, Travis Meeks, the singer, he wrote all the songs as well. Singer, guitarist, songwriter. He couldn't maintain the band relationship, and what happened is that he booted out the other guys from the band. So the original guys in the band were was it Todd Vesta? A second, we'll have a look at this. Sorry, Todd Whittener, Jesse Vesta, and Matt Towle, maybe Matt Towle. In the middle of a tour, he kicked them out, and kind of at the peak of their popularity when they were touring this album and it was doing relatively well, went on to sell 1 million copies. He kicked those guys out, and that seemed to kind of hamper their momentum. Those guys went on to form the band Tantric. Now, I've never heard of this band Tantric before, and I was shocked to find they went platinum. So those guys left. They got another singer. The singer was called Hugo Ferreira, and they went platinum. They sold. They must have been relatively big. And I looked on YouTube. They've got some songs. 10 million views, 2 million views, 1.7 million views. So I'm just going to play a little snippet of it because it's pretty bad. I was saying before about some of this music's actually okay, but this is pretty bad. Yeah, see that's a vocal you can see in the video I'm watching. There's a vocal harmony between the guitarist and the singer. That yeah, it's a direct freaking rip off of Alice in Chains. They're not even trying to hide it. Like I'm not saying all vocal melodies and doing a kind of a sound is, but that kind of low in the kind of cadence of Lane Staley, Jerry Cantrell is a rip off. The music itself is fucking awful. And it's almost like he's rapping breakdown. Yeah, and it just seems like I said, it just seems inauthentic, derivative, unoriginal. But there seemed to be a period there in the early 2000s where this kind of music was pretty big, and these guys, that's pretty good that they managed to leave one band and start up another band and be successful with that band too, without the singer. And that with this band, the thing that people talked about were especially the guy's voice, Travis Meek's vocals, a low voice, almost had a certain Chris Cornell-ish, not to the high register, but at the low register, had a little bit reminiscent of Chris Cornell's lower register. Um, but yeah, I don't know what else to really say about it. Yellow CD, Days of the New. Let's have a quick look at this, eh? Is that him? I think, no, that's him, isn't it? That's Travis Meeks. Apparently, he has Asperger's syndrome, and that's one of the reasons why he had difficulty maintaining the band relationship. And if you look at their Wikipedia, you can see that they have um, that the band still goes, still. Well, actually, no, sorry, they broke up in 2014. They continued for a long time after this album, but they went through tons of members. Nicole, was it Scherzinger, the singer from Pussycat Dolls? She was in the band at one stage. It's obviously before her pop turn, but it says that that she was in the she's on the lineup in the past members section of Days the New. You can see Nicole Scherzinger's name. Um, but anyway, so he went through a lot of members. He also seems to be getting arrested quite regularly and having substance abuse issues. And then in 2014, almost like a last hurrah, he got the original guys, Todd Whitner, Jesse Vest, and Matt Towle, back together. And they went on a tour, and they were talking about releasing an EP. A few shows into the tour, he kicked them out of the band, or the band broke down. Maybe he didn't kick them out, but basically they said, "Fuck this! This is ridiculous." And they missed a bunch of shows. Then he begged them to come back, and they went back. But then again, it didn't last. So yeah, it just seems like so many artists, it's hard for him to maintain the at least the modicum of kind of responsibility needed to keep a band going, especially a touring band. It seems like he had some meth problems, um, alcohol problems. Mike Starr from Alice in Chains was playing in the band also for a short period before he died, a year before he died. So here we go. Yeah. So anyway, uh, when I hear this album, like I often talk about music when I talk about albums, it really takes me back to that time, driving around in my red Mitsubishi Mirage, 1981 model, um, on the little radio that had a knob that you turned to tune it, And that song, Touch, Peel and Stand, was played relentlessly on the radio. All right, guys, thank you for watching.